And thank you all for joining. I'm really excited about this session, and I think there's a lot of interest, a lot of great questions. So thank you, everybody. I'm here with my esteemed colleagues here. Let me do some introductions. First, start with Jennifer Szakaly. Jennifer is the proud owner of Caregiver Corners, which she started in 2000, and her entire career has been focused on care management. She has her master's in gerontology, and really, I consider her a trailblazer in the Charlotte market. First person I ever heard of in this care managing role. She has held some important positions within the Caregiver Management Association, the Aging Life Care Association, which really governs and monitors care management. We're going to learn more about that as we move forward, but she is one of 50 care managers across the country that is a fellow of the Leadership Academy. So that's really an important distinction. And she has served as a master guardian in the US as well. And there are fewer than 100 people who serve in that capacity as well. So really deep professional history, a passion for this work. And so you'll be hearing a lot of great things about Jennifer. And then to my right is Cindy Hostetler, and Cindy has an equally extensive and impressive background. And her background is primarily in the clinical care area. She has her master's in nursing, spent 30 years or so in acute care roles at Atrium and in management levels as well, and has really extensive history and background in leadership and collaboration with physicians as well. So has a very different backgrounds, which I thought would be very helpful and interesting for this audience. 6 years ago, Cindy started a company called Care Weavers, which is a care management company, and has really a successful run there. And so we're going to hear more about that and her experiences there. So I'm really excited, and thank you both for taking the time to do this session with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great, great. So let's start with the basics. What is care management, and why would someone need a care manager? Jennifer, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. So a care manager is an expert in aging well. That's generally what we talk about when we talk about a care manager. This person is a professional, different backgrounds, as you pointed out, some differences between Cindy and I. So nursing, gerontology, social work, but it's really the professional that helps the family, the entire family unit, and the older adult meet their goals in aging and navigate everything having to do with the long-term care system. A care manager is always focused on making sure that the client has the most opportunity for independence and dignity throughout the aging process. So kind of generally speaking, that's the best way to describe a care manager.
Great, great, excellent, excellent. So now we know what a care manager is. Let's start out with talking a little bit about the things that a care manager does. So I wondered, Cindy, if you could share a little bit about what, in your experience, what does a care manager do?
Sure. So first and foremost, care management is about, as Jennifer mentioned, aging well and making sure that the client, sometimes referred to as the patient, is having the utmost level of autonomy about their decisions in their healthcare and how they want those decisions to maintain their quality of life, and understand as they make those decisions how that impact is going to be felt. So care management is about understanding the different types of illnesses that someone has, how they view those illnesses, what their level of education is regarding how to maintain a state of health with those chronic conditions, and really identifying goals with the client as to what they want to be able to achieve while they are living with these types of diagnoses. So that's how we really set kind of the tone of how we coach our clients to make decisions. So if someone says to me, the most important thing in my life is being able to get on a plane and fly for 15 hours to see my parents in Slovakia. So when you're then faced with a decision, a substantial healthcare decision, the question that should come is, after, what are the risks, the benefits, all those kinds of things. If I do this, how is it going to affect that very thing that I enjoy doing the most? So I would say that is basically the essence of care management, and helping people to find ways to keep themselves healthy, ask the right questions of the physicians and the healthcare team, making sure that they have all the information that they need to make informed decisions.
So in your experience, what is typically the impetus for somebody calling you and saying, I need help?
Well, we were fairly naive, I think, when we started our company it'll be 6 years in July. We really thought that people would want to be proactive about planning their care, and planning how they wanted to receive care, and also planning around advanced care, meaning at the end of their lives, how did they want that to play out? Well, we found out that really wasn't true, because none of us like to talk about our own mortality. I, as a nurse, have had an advance directive since I was 21 years old, only because I was working with people who were at the end of their lives, and I was seeing them die in situations that I knew I really didn't want to die in. But like, our clients really do come to us a lot of times from a point of either crisis or near crisis. Sometimes kids, adult children who don't live in Charlotte come home for the holidays, and they'll call and say, visited with mom, nothing in the refrigerator. She was always such a great housekeeper, and the house isn't clean, very forgetful. Can you help me make her do something, like move into an assisted living? And I'm like, no, we can't make your mom really do anything, but we can work with you on a crisis plan so that we can help keep her safe. And when something does occur, we know exactly who's going to be part of that team and how decisions are going to be made. So we find that. And then sometimes we do have some proactive clients that call us and say, I am getting older. I just had a call today from a gentleman in his 70s, and he said, I'm a solo ager. I don't have any children. I don't have any relatives in the area that I live in. And I just had another diagnosis added to my diagnosis portfolio, if you will. And I need someone who can help me understand that and help to navigate the healthcare system.
I think if I can add
definitely.
something. So I think when people ask us what we do, it's very hard to answer that question, because I think if Cindy and I wrote down what we do in any given week, it is all over the place. And it does kind of come back to what type of client, if they've come to us for planning, then that might be reviewing long-term care insurance, helping people understand the differences between the care communities that are in the area, what Medicare covers, what Medicare won't cover, what their budget might need to look like for care as they age. But then when we get those crisis calls, we might be jumping into a situation where we're helping the family when they only have a few hours to choose a skilled rehab facility following a hospitalization, or we might be dealing with someone that has an emergency and they're the caregiver. And so we've got to jump in and sometimes help the caregiver and the person that they were caring for and figure out how we can shore up the whole, situation. So, anything from hiring, providers and bringing support in, taking clients to doctor's appointments so we can better understand the medical piece, medication management. What a care manager can do is really all over the place, but it's very individualized. And I think that that's important for people to know, that it really does depend on what the person's needs are. There's not a set thing that either Cindy or I's businesses are going to say, this is, do these 5 things. That's not going to be applicable to everybody's situation. So we really do come in to every client situation, looking at all the different circumstances and trying to figure out, how we can get things back on track if it's an emergency.
Exactly.
Great. Well, that's a great segue into the situation when you do get that call, and then you're going out to, hopefully not in a crisis situation, and it's kind of the meet and greet, and then there's an assessment process. So I wondered if you could walk through what that assessment process looks like, and I'll let you respond as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that we do a lot of initial appointments where we are sitting down with the entire family, or sometimes we're sitting down with just the caregivers. We always like to try to give people the opportunity to talk to us privately about what their concerns are. Caregivers are always calling us with concerns. And if an older adult client reaches out to us themselves, they are calling us with issues of independence. So they are fearful of losing things, and the family has concerns, worries about what might happen. So when we approach that initial conversation, it's very much like what's we just described, in terms of, we want to have a conversation to gain an understanding of where you are in the process of planning, thinking, understanding everything about you as a person, the medical piece, the social and emotional piece, all of it. When we begin the assessment process for us, it sometimes depends on where the person's environment is. If they are living at home, we would need to look at home safety to do an evaluation to determine what might need to change with the home environment. We always want to do some type of cognitive screening. And then from there, we have kind of a bank of assessments that we can use depending on what the person's situation are and depending on what the concerns are. What we try to do is break that up over time, as opposed to having a really long, visit initially with the client. We just try to treat it more as a kind of a fluid process. But that's an important way. I think that the care managers differ in the way that we do things. So,
Sure. I think our processes are very similar. Going into the home, we usually do an initial phone consultation with whomever is the referral source. And typically it's a caregiver with concerns about future planning and next steps, et cetera, and gather just basic information about what are the things that are most pressing and concerning at this point. When we go out to the home, it's really an effort not only to assess the physical environment and what's going on with the client, the caregiver, et cetera, but it's also to start establishing a relationship of trust and reinforcing with clients their own autonomy, because our goal is always to help our clients be better advocates for themselves if possible. Now, granted, if we have someone who's cognitively impaired, that may not be something that's achievable, but there's also that particular portion for the caregiver as well. I find a lot of times, depending upon people, their education levels, and also, frankly, their ages, that there's a level of intimidation sometimes with asking questions of doctors. And what we do is we really outline what our role is, and our role is to support you. And if you are not getting answers that you need, we can help achieve those things. And as Jennifer mentioned, it is a holistic perspective. So it's not just emotional, physical, functional health, state of the home, safety, et cetera. It's finances, it's future hopes and dreams. Are there things that you still want to be able to do in your life? And then, how do you see that last part of your life kind of looking? So it's multifactorial, and it takes place over a fairly significant piece of time.
Good. So now the big question people may have is, how do I know it's time to call one of you? So
It's time.
Yeah,
That's right.
the old adage, early is always better.
Yes.
But there are probably certain events that kind of trigger that phone call, and it may be the adult child coming in and seeing the crisis, as you said, or maybe a hospital event, and I don't know where I'm going next. But typically, are there other things that you see, common themes in terms of what is usually that trigger event for the phone call, and when is really the best time to do that?
I would say, generally speaking, a new diagnosis or just globally kind of a change in your health status is a big one. A fall is usually another time that we would get a lot of calls, and that can be an indication of a lot of different things, but that's a good time to call in a care manager. And then again, family noticing in your example of going home at the holidays. I think we're always busy in January because people have gone home, noticed changes, and then they come back and are definitely on task to do something about it. So noticing changes and a new diagnosis, and if there's any safety concerns, I think that's kind of the other batch of when their worry really starts to manifest, someone wandering, someone leaving the kitchen stove on, something pronounced that really creates a pretty urgent sense of worry about the situation.
Yeah, I think the only thing I might add to that too is any kind of change in the dynamic of the team that particular client sees as their support system. So if we lose a member of that support system, or a member of that support system has their own personal health that they are becoming concerned about. So that's another indication that, we might need to broaden that a little bit and also bring in someone with some expertise to help us kind of work our way through the system and get the very best care that we can.
I want to say too that I think that what's important to understand about a care manager is that I know that all of us that are in this area are not unwilling to have an initial conversation with people and see if it's the right time to get started. Having us meet you all or come to the home does not obligate you to any type of 10-year-long process, and that's that type of thing. And so we really try to be subtle in our entry into a situation, and I think that sometimes helps people be more open to the process. Is that there's no commitment, it's a conversation, and that really is how I think we all kind of approach the beginning of that relationship.
Yeah, that's a good point. And given the fact that our role is difficult for people to understand and difficult for us sometimes to explain, it allows you the opportunity to share a little bit more things privately with us. And then we can say, oh, well, here's exactly how we can help you in that particular space.
Well, and you think about the fact that this is a really important relationship you're establishing, and your relationships that they don't always, start right away, and it can be building, and it could be just sort of setting, kind of the start of a relationship that when you need them and need each other, is going to be really important. And what I love about the role, and we at Memory Movement Charlotte work with a number of care managers, including these two wonderful women here, and we work very much in collaboration with the role, because we see oftentimes that caregivers are struggling, they may need extra help. Decisions sometimes can be so overwhelming. I wondered if you could each talk about your experiences with that and the collaboration and how that works. I know I see, Cindy, you're here quite a bit with different patients, appointments and things like that. Maybe talk a little bit about that collaboration with Memory Movement Charlotte.
Sure. So Memory Movement Charlotte, I think, is just a wonderful asset to the community. It is a place not only for someone who is impacted by cognitive impairment or movement disorder, but I see it more so as a place of support for caregivers. There are so many uncertainties when you are caring for someone with cognitive impairment. And what I see a lot is people want to know, well, what stage is this? Because they want to try to think about a timeline for what's going to happen next. And, Dr. Chaconis and Dr. Edwards and Iyer are wonderful about supporting that caregiver and giving them a perspective of, here I think is where we are. Things haven't really changed that much. Here's what we need to do to continue to support this individual. They also really help, I think, alleviate a lot of pressure on the caregiver. I think as caregivers, they feel like they should be doing everything within their power to keep that impacted person's life exactly the same as it used to be, when in fact, that may be causing that person more stress than benefit. And it's that level of reassurance. And, Dr. Chaconis will always say, it's about dignity, it's about respect. And it's about just recognizing and meeting people where they are. So again, coming here, at least with my clients and their caregivers, they always leave with a sense of reassurance and support that they know somebody is here and they can call or ask questions anytime.
I would agree with what Cindy said. I think the other piece of it, why the collaboration between movement and memory center and care managers always seems to be a positive relationship, is that a lot of the reassurance that you mentioned, we try to carry that out the door and back at home, and make sure that what any of the doctors here have said to the family kind of sticks with them as they're going through the days and weeks between appointments, working with that person at home. So it helps us immensely to be able to be at the appointments and listen to what the providers have to say, because again, we can make sure that anything that needs to change is implemented at home, but also so that same messaging of support gets carried through and is constant for the caregiver, because that's key.
Good. Well, I think I mentioned earlier how appreciative we were of some of the questions we got, and this is a particularly good one right from the audience. So, and I'm quoting, some people are better than others about asking for help and often need a lot of encouragement to do so. I know nobody can relate to this comment. Can you share with us how you would introduce a care manager to a very independent, smart woman who doesn't accept or recognize her need for care in certain areas of her life, such as meal prep, eating, driving, etc.? Who wants to battle over that?
I'll tackle that first. So I had an appointment that was almost exactly that that client situation this morning. And again, I think going back to what Cindy and I both said, it really is a conversation. We're not coming in the door with a clipboard and a mountain of paperwork and a very businesslike. I mean, we want to come in and talk to you and get to know you and understand your situation, and really building that rapport. And so when I walked in the door to meet the new clients this morning, both independent, still driving, early 90s, doing very well, the conversation was, how can we keep this going? And I'm the person that can help you as things come up, or as I spot things that might be warning signs, that something's changing. How can we keep this going? They love everything about where they are, what they're doing, their level of activity, their health. Everything's good, but they want to keep it that way. And that's an excellent way to use a care manager in a very preventative way, is to let us come in and have the conversation and help that person remain independent. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes that might be the wrong approach to think of it as it's time for, you need care now. And so it's time for this person to come in, and it's really that conversation about what can you still do very well, and how can we keep that going for you?
Yeah, and somebody actually mentioned this, a colleague mentioned this to me this week, actually, because there's a client that she's working with that feels as though would benefit from our services or the services of a care manager. But she said, they are very independent. And I said, well, how did you handle that question in preparation for them giving me a call? And she said, well, what I said was, the reason that you're independent is when you don't know enough to consult somebody else. And that's what allows you to stay independent. And I think that is a very important thing. We all do want to believe and think that, the healthcare practitioners that we've been engaging with over a period of time are the very best, and that's all we need. Sometimes we may need more, or sometimes we may need something different. And as Jennifer pointed out, sometimes it's another set of eyes just to notice some subtleties maybe that other people aren't noticing. And if we find those things early enough, the likelihood of maintaining that level of independence is better the sooner that we spot those types of things, and we can put preventative types of things or healing types of things in place. So engaging early, I think, is a good thing. And it doesn't mean, as Jennifer said, that you have to see us all the time. We can agree on what kind of a schedule works. I have clients sometimes that I only see once every 5 or 6 weeks, unless there's something going on, and then I see them more frequently. So that's kind of a mutual kind of contractual verbal agreement that we have about how we're going to engage with each other.
Great. Good. So let's now shift to how to find and select a care manager. The concept of care management, it feels like it's relatively new in the Carolinas, but perhaps not. And we'll get educated on that a little bit. Jennifer, I always think about you as a trailblazer in this market. You were the first person I heard of as a care manager, and in those days it was geriatric care management, right? So that's what they've rebranded. It sounds a little more inviting now. So is it really new in Charlotte? And if so, why do you think it is?
So yeah, that's a great question. So care management is not a new profession in general. Care managers have existed since probably going back to the late 70s. The kind of forming group and the National Association came in the 80s. But care management, like some other things in healthcare, has been a little bit slower to be adopted in the Southeast as a region. And so you have people that know of maybe even several care managers if you're in a larger urban area in New England, for example, and providers are accustomed to care managers being involved and referring to them often. And we're still answering the question of you're a what? So it's new, but there are it's new to this area. It's a new concept. There were a few people before me that had smaller practices, but we don't have the recognition that we would like to have as a profession. But we're certainly working on that, and it helps that there are a growing number of care managers in the area, to help our visibility and to provide consumers with choice too.
Yeah. It seems like in California, it seems to be a much more mature business. You really listen, they really have been doing this for quite a long time, very much in a sort of an accepted practice.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So let's talk, we mentioned earlier the Aging Life Care Association. I know you're very involved in that association, which is really the governing body around care management. So can you talk a little bit about what they do, your level of involvement, and then a little bit about the local chapter here in Charlotte?
Yeah. So the Aging Life Care Association, you can access the website by going to aginglifecare.org. And it is our national professional association. So they provide us guidance on certifications that are relevant to this job. They provide conferences and CEU opportunities so that we can continue to learn about new topics related to aging. And through that membership, it's divided regionally across the United States. And so in North Carolina, we're a part of the Southeast chapter, which is a seven-state chapter. And then on the local level, they encourage us to get together in, larger metro areas. And so those of us that are care managers in the Charlotte area who are members of the Aging Life Care Association, we call it ALCA for short, get together regularly and share resources. We, consider ourselves friends and colleagues. It's a very it's a profession that I think lends itself to helping. So we're always helping one another grow as professionals. And then our chapter will do things like conferences and CEU opportunities as well. So there's a lot of good things. Our national association, it tries to get connected with other large national associations like AARP, and affect policy and get involved with big decision makers for different things related to aging. And I've participated on the chapter board. It's a great organization. And again, at the heart of it was this group of care managers in New York who started the association, and they kind of decided, hey, we all do the same thing. Wouldn't it be neat if we got together and pooled our ideas and started helping one another and, learning more and that sort of thing. So, so it's really grown from there. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's a great little history lesson.
Yeah.
What I love about the fact that both of you are here is that you do have very diverse backgrounds and experiences, which is great. So I wondered how that impacts the clients that are either drawn to you or you elect to help. And we talked about collaboration and how you might work together if you found somebody had a particular set of circumstances that maybe lent itself to somebody who had more domain expertise in those areas. So why don't we start out with you, Cynthia?
Sure. Yeah. And I think one of the goals for a care manager is to make sure that the client gets to the best care manager that has the level of background and the personality that is going to be best to work with that individual. So there is a lot of inter-referrals that take place with the group. We focus a lot on crisis management, planning, intervention. I do a lot of work in the hospital environment when people maybe have been admitted and a family member calls and says, we've been here for X number of days. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how to get in touch with the doc, et cetera. And then we also get a lot of calls that are outside of our domain. So any calls that are around solo agers that need someone potentially to look after an adult child when they're gone, that would be a call to Jennifer's group because she provides guardian services. And frankly, anyone who is trying to work with a mental health diagnosis is an expertise that my company does not offer. We do not have any background in mental health services. Jennifer is fortunate enough to have folks as part of her team that have worked in the mental health field. So that's another area of referral that I would send Jennifer's way.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this before the broadcast got started, but we are able to, as we get to know one another locally, that's one of the advantages is getting to know what each other's areas of expertise is. And, Charlotte, as it gets larger, there are some people that only practice in certain areas or want to kind of concentrate their cases in certain areas. So it helps us to all kind of know, what is everyone's service area, because it may not be, all of the greater Charlotte area. And I do think that there are a lot of differences between the types of cases that we want. And one of the things we talked about is, this is because it's a service-based business, it is people-based. And so I think we know we're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And so if we can try to identify early on that it might not be a good match with our company, we definitely want them, to be connected to another one of our colleagues. We want to make sure that they get handed off to somebody who's qualified and that they're not just left floundering or asking, other people who may not have our level of expertise. So that handoff is really important, even if we can't be the ones to help.
And I think in conjunction with making sure that the client gets the right fit around the needs that they have, is also recognizing that as care managers, we bring in what I would call a deep bench, if you will, of colleagues that we work with on an ongoing basis that tackle and have expertise in certain areas that we may not. So lots of colleagues that we probably have in common are senior move managers, people that can go into someone's home and help them as they prepare to try to downsize to move into a different type of living environment. We do a lot of work with elder law attorneys. So the whole financial question that people have, mom has funds for this number of years, but after those funds are gone, her Social Security isn't going to cover the expenses that she has. So, we refer to those types of individuals. And frankly, just, counselors, anticipatory grief counselors, all those different types of individuals, concierge, physical, occupational, speech, language, pathology, therapy services that can be provided in the home. So our teams bring a wealth of knowledge, not just from our personal experience, but also just from the colleagues that we engage with in the community around providing care.
Absolutely. And that's one of the ways that we share on a regular basis when we do get together is, we might say, hey, I've got a client and this is their specific need. And I might not have been able to find something, but it might be somebody that Cindy knows exactly who that client should be using, and we're able to do an email introduction. So we love being able to share resources again, because what we're doing is so specific to what the client needs. We're always learning about new resources and new professionals that we need to be connected with, which is great.
Sure. Great. So we're hearing a lot about the professionalism of this organization, and many of us, including myself, as a caregiver, and that set of experiences really shapes you as a person, and can be a very challenging journey. So you come out of it thinking, oh, I know everything about being a caregiver. So hoping that this is offering, a insight into the importance of the experience and the professionalism of this this work. So that would be great. So now we, move to, oh, you're ready to select some. Talk about what are some of the questions somebody should ask as they're really interviewing somebody who is literally and figuratively going to be your lifeline during one of the most vulnerable and challenging times of your life. And so it's very important to do your due diligence. So let's talk a little bit about what that may look like.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, so when people call me, and sometimes they will say, well, I've got a few other people to call, are there any questions, that I should be sure to ask? And, my first response is, if you're talking to somebody that's a member of the Aging Life Care Association, you're going to be okay. But I think, some people do have an idea of the background of the person, the skill set of the person that they're going to need. Some people may be able to recognize that their situation is very medically complex. And so immediately that is going to be a good referral for the nurse care managers that have businesses in this area. So I think if you know enough about that to ask those questions, those are good. We were talking about on-call services, if you're an out-of-town family member and your loved one lives here and you need on-call services, that might be a question that you ask. Do you have on-call services? Who on your team is going to be doing the visits? That's another one again. They want to know, am I talking to the person who's going to do the visits, or am I talking to the person who's scheduling? And so kind of being able to help them understand what that process is going to look like. But I always recommend just, you can ask us for references. All of us are happy to give you references of clients that we've worked with so that you can have a frank conversation with them. But I think making sure that we do have a professional background that makes sense for this job. So somebody that's coming from a nursing discipline, social work, gerontology, something like that. But I think asking those kinds of questions are a good way to get started. A lot of people don't know what questions.
Right,
ask,
exactly. No, absolutely.
I think aside from asking the questions, it's just the feel that you get with the conversation. Some people you're going to call and you're going to know right out of the gate just by the way the conversation is going that doesn't feel right to you. When it feels right and they meet those qualifications and have the right background, and you say, how many people have you taken care of like this? And they're able to answer you with, lots of patients like this and provide references. I think that gut feel sometimes is also good to just make a mental note about.
Right. Well, I'm sure in your years of experience, you have situations where the patient is the client, and then many situations, particularly when you work with us, where the client is the caregiver of the patient. So talk a little bit about how that looks different, feels different. How do you balance that so the patient, because if we have a caregiver in the mix, they feel part of the experience, and that everybody's not talking about them or what their needs are. So Cindy, why don't we start out with you with that?
Sure. We have a number of clients like that where, initially the call came in from the caregiver and the concerns were, I need assistance in terms of navigating the healthcare system with my, spouse, most likely, who is suffering from cognitive impairment, as well as expertise within the home about how to keep them safe, how to understand what's happening, and how to appropriately respond to what's happening. So we typically sign an agreement with that spouse unless the person that needs the care is, able and competent to sign for themselves. But it's a release of, confidentiality so that we can talk about what's happening. And what we do almost always is, unless the spouse is so impaired that by hearing and participating in a conversation would cause them stress, we really encourage people to bring everyone to the table. And that includes the team, the children, the neighbors, sometimes whoever's going to be helping to support that family and that couple during the process. And I think that just by including and then sometimes repeating or asking someone to repeat, what we've been discussing and encouraging them to express how they feel about it is very important. And the number one thing that we find in any type of situation where a caregiver is working with a spouse is that the person impacted by cognitive impairment is aware that they have cognitive impairment, and they're also aware that they are going to be losing pieces of their own autonomy over time. And that's one of the things that we really work to try to help protect as much as possible and give them input into those conversations.
Yeah. I think that's a huge issue, of dignity, is making sure that the person that has cognitive impairment feels like they're a part of the conversation. And even if they can't meaningfully participate, what I try to do, whether it's the beginning or the end of my time, if I'm visiting someone at home, I might try to take that person aside just by themselves and after being in the conversation a little bit, I have a sense of sort of how they're functioning. But it might be something as simple as, could you please take me around and show me your house?
Mm-hmm.
Or you have a lovely porch, could you show me what your yard looks like? And letting them be the ones that are sort of leading that interaction, and they see that I'm spending separate time with them. I think that's one of the strategies that I use that I think is meaningful to people in those situations. But it is hard. And I think we recognize that certainly in those situations, while the client, is technically the older adult, we know that what we're doing is benefiting the family and very often the caregiver, even more so than is obvious for the client. But keeping them a part of the conversation is super important if it's appropriate.
Great, good. We often think about care management as being help in the home. We've referenced a couple of times visiting someone in the home. Can you speak to other environments where you might be providing care management services? Specifically, if somebody has already transitioned into assisted living, memory care, do they still need care management services? And what might that look like?
So I would say yes. Anyone at any level of care in any care environment, including the hospital, could benefit from care management. And that's when we really shift into, I think, more of an advocacy mode. We want to make sure that the people are getting good quality of care. We want to make sure that their needs are being met at the level of care that they're at. And we want to make sure that what the care community purports to do is actually being done for our clients. The other thing that's key too is that some people live in care communities and they don't have family locally. And so again, we kind of become an extension of the family in that way, and that we need to be able to support them, maybe bring them things that they need, those types of things to kind of make sure that their life in that community, is as successful as possible. Like you spend a lot of time in the hospitals, I know, so you could speak about these stuff.
Yeah, we do spend, we spend a lot of time in the hospitals, but I think also spend just as much, maybe if not more time in communities. Sometimes we might be on the front end helping people to actually make decisions about a community. And sometimes when things change in communities, as they do very frequently, one of the biggest changes we just all went through was COVID. And we know that communities changed because of COVID. And we have to still continue to be the eyes and the ears and the advocates for those individuals, because the leadership in communities sets the culture and the tone for the community. And if that changes, that can also change the care provision in communities. And we have had to make difficult decisions sometimes with clients and their next of kin or powers of attorney to potentially move them to other locations just because we thought the care had declined since we had originally moved that client into that particular community. In the acute care environment, yes, we provide services with people that have complex medical conditions. we can help them sort through the information, come up with the right questions to ask. Great example that I had last year was a gentleman found out really kind of suddenly that he had 4 different conditions with his heart that needed to be surgically repaired. And he hadn't even known about it before and was diagnosed by going to an urgent care for a cough, a chronic cough. And so he came to us and he's like, I'd really like to stay in Charlotte to get this done. And, you know, my first question is always, have you had a second opinion? And if the answer is no, I say you have to have a second opinion. And typically we want those second opinions to occur outside of the Charlotte community, just because there is a lot of inter-referrals that take place within Charlotte. And you'll always have to be, I guess, aware of potential bias that might have some physicians feeling not quite as free to speak in challenging a diagnosis that might have been provided by their colleague down the street. So long story short, we did interview 2 physicians here in Charlotte per his request, but we also interviewed somebody in Chapel Hill. Well, it turned out that that physician in Chapel Hill, and I'm not trying to down any of the physicians here in Charlotte, but that physician in Chapel Hill not only had a substantially higher volume of those types of particular cases that they had handled in the past, but had an entirely different approach around how they were going to do it and could explain why they were going to do it in different sequence. So they ultimately ended up going there. But those are some of the examples that we also do, you know, helping people kind of navigate a new diagnosis that, if not done correctly or managed correctly, could result in severe impairment or possibly death.
Well, that really speaks to the benefit of you knowing how to navigate the healthcare system. So that's really terrific. And you both mentioned, you know, advocacy. And so as we segue into discussions about different roles we have in the community that, you know, some people may have a clear understanding, may not. I thought maybe we could go through those, one of which is the healthcare advocate. And I know you have particular certification in that field as well. So what is a healthcare advocate?
Well, healthcare advocate is someone that is going to work for the client. And the goals of advocacy are to make sure, and I've talked about this as we've been going through some of these questions, make sure that patients are well represented in the healthcare system, make sure that their voices are heard, make sure that they are receiving the level of respect, attentiveness, responsiveness, etc., that is deserved as a patient, and make sure that their healthcare team is adhering to their rights as a patient. It is difficult for people sometimes based on age, gender, education level to say to a physician who's not necessarily been providing great care, I want to see somebody else. That's very difficult for a lot of people. And, you know, one of the things that we reassure people about is, first of all, if you change physicians, that physician's not necessarily even going to know that you changed physicians, right? It's a big community and there's a lot of patients that they're already seeing. But we help make them aware this is a patient right that you have. I recently had a client this weekend who was in the emergency room 2 days in a row and unable to get in touch with the physician who had done a procedure on him 2 weeks ago, which was causing problems now. And I finally said, and they said, well, I'm afraid to ask to get a referral. And I said, listen, this is your fundamental right as patient. You have the right as a patient to hire and fire the people that take care of you. It's okay to do that. And if you're not getting the care that you need or they're not responsive, we need to move on to someone who is. So advocacy, I think, is inherent in our roles as care managers, as advocates. The Professional Advocacy Certification Board is relatively new. It started 4 years ago and offered its first round of exams. And people can sit for that exam and then you earn a certification once you pass the exam. That is another place that you can go to find individuals that have qualifications around advocacy. And many of them also are qualified as care managers. If you look at their backgrounds, they're either social workers, nursing, gerontologists, or certificates in gerontology. So pacb.org is another place that you can find access to qualified individuals.
Right. So if we're in the hospital situation, and I'm sure you probably all know somebody or maybe experienced yourself with, oh, you have to be discharged, and you're like, where do I go? What do I do? So there are a couple of roles in the hospital that that sound very much alike. You've got the hospital care manager, you've got the case manager, you got the discharge nurse. What are they all one and the same? Are they different? Talk about that role. How are they compensated? You know, what's their incentive to get you out quickly, or what?
So I'll take the first hit at that around the hospital. So what I always encourage people to do to understand what their focus is mainly on is to, and this came from a physician long ago. He said, if you want to know how they're going to manage your care, follow the money. And so one thing I will tell you is hospitals are always busy in this Charlotte market. They're always usually overloaded. They set up overflow units. Their emergency rooms are filled just because of probably capacity issues. And what I tell people is they're incented to get you in, to treat you, to identify what your diagnosis is, to treat you and get you out of the hospital as quickly as possible. You have to be safe in being able to be discharged, but also they're going to want to make sure that they meet that Medicare requirement. Medicare is going to offer them a certain amount of money based on your diagnosis. And if they exceed those number of days, then the hospital just has to pick up the cost of that care without necessarily being reimbursed. So it's not unusual if I just had this today. It's been a week, as I said. It's only Tuesday. I just had a situation today where cognitively impaired individuals in the hospital. I just visited him yesterday, and his wife, who's getting over COVID, is at home. And I pull up his portal and I see that they've written a discharge summary. So I immediately call his wife. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And she said, I just got a call from the case manager and they're discharging him today. I'm like, well, what is his therapist, his physical therapist said? He's not been out of the bed more than once. Are they referring to, subacute rehab? Did they give him a discharge order for physical and occupational rehab? None of that tends to get done unless one of us are there saying, stop, let's pump the brakes just for a second. This gentleman is not probably ready to go home. His wife's at home with COVID. He's been in the bed now for 3 days. He's probably just as weak as she is. Are we making the best decision? And by having a care manager, we can usually help people kind of pump the brakes and stall for a little bit until we get some underpinnings in place and make some decisions. Well, do we want to bring him home? Or is it better if he maybe spends a week or two in subacute rehab, getting some reconditioning and some strengthening? Because the last thing I want to have is someone who goes home to a spouse who's not feeling well, and then all of a sudden we have a fall, and then they land right back in the emergency room again. But again, oftentimes those types of things are considered, not because the hospital isn't necessarily wanting to do the right thing. This is capacity. These case managers are sometimes handling up to 20 discharges in a day. And the level of detail involved in all that is impossible for people to do. So in all the cases that we've been involved in with case managers at the hospital, they are thankful for us. Thank God you're here. Can you help me do this? Sure. Yeah, we'll handle the whole ball of wax if you let us, and we'll make those plans in conjunction with the hospital team.
Great. Great. That has to be a difficult time, and I'm sure they are very, very happy to have your help.
Well, transitions in care are always fraught with potential disaster, whether it's lapses in communication, people not going home with the right orders for the right medications, people going to communities without the right orders or the right medications. So it's always helpful to kind of slow down that process and make sure we go through every line item so that we are 100% sure that we have everything for that patient that we need when they leave the hospital.
Right. Even as something as simple as making sure that their medications haven't been changed. If you were just at the cardiologist with the client and there was a medication change from their longstanding cardiologist, and then they go to the ER for an hour and the ER doctor changes the medication, that's something that we need to know about very quickly so that we can address with the longstanding cardiologist. But those are the kinds of things that fall through the crack. And I agree that it's a capacity issue. These discharge planners, that if they have somebody that's, an incredibly complex case, and our client just needs, maybe therapy and, a referral out to a specialist or something, that's going to be so far down, the priority list for them. So yeah, it is very helpful when we can come in and kind of bolster what they're doing.
Great, good. Yeah, one of the most difficult transitions is the decision and process for placing a loved one in a long-term care community. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, kind of that market, if you will. There are a number of companies out there who are free placement services. And so I wanted to just sort of educate the group a little bit about that, talk about how you all work in terms of helping with that transition. And is that fee-based, where, again, follow the money. And then also the role of a social worker, which I know you have social workers as part of your organization, and they play also a vital role in helping families with this transition. So just wanted to talk a little bit about how your services differ than those other organizations or services that exist in the market, because it can be confusing for people to go, who do I go to? How do they operate? What's different? What do I really need?
I think, yes. So there are some different services out there. I think the biggest decision people have to make for themselves is, are they wanting to save money and use free services at the risk of decisions being made or recommendations being made that are money driven on the back end of that, between the professional that's assisting you in the facility, or are you wanting to engage a professional that is working for you? And our job as care managers, we are charging the client privately for our services. And part of the benefit of that is that we are working exclusively for the client. We are not accepting any fees from any service providers, from any care communities. We're not financially motivated to do anything other than assist our clients in the best way possible. And as Janet mentioned, there are social workers, and I think discharge planners are, a good example, that at different points along the long-term care spectrum, people encounter social workers. There would be a social worker at a rehab facility, but care managers are the only ones that kind of exist across the entire spectrum. You can be working with somebody from the time that you're independent and just retiring all the way until death. A care manager can be with you through that entire journey, whereas social workers or discharge planners that work for specific entities can only assist you when you're with that specific entity. So we tell clients that, somebody might say, well, I'll call the discharge planner and ask them about that. And I'll say, you left the hospital an hour ago. That discharge planner has forgotten about it. So, but yeah, so that's an important, I think, distinction in the longevity and the breadth of types of cases that we can take. But that is an important distinction about the free services. We get that question a lot, I think.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to mention as well, and you brought up a good point, is they are working within a component of the healthcare system. I look at the healthcare system as a continuum-based system, including where you live. So I know not only what may be happening in the hospital or the subacute rehab or the skilled nursing unit or your home. When you talk to somebody in the hospital, like a case manager, and they say, we're going to discharge your mom tomorrow to subacute rehab. Here's a list of 20 places that'll take her. Which one do you want? Well, how would you know, right? First of all, how would you know? And second, if they say, oh, well, these have 4-star ratings, you could start with those. Well, they might have 4-star ratings, but we need to dig a little deeper under the covers to see what those 4-star ratings are about. And I always say, sometimes they've put a lot of pressure on clients to say, we need to move. We have people waiting for this bed. And these are the 3 facilities that can take your mom. I said, have you visited those facilities? Well, no. I said, I encourage you to do that on your day off, because I can tell you this is not a place that I would put my mother. So Jennifer and I and our teams are in and out of those facilities all the time. We know what they look like. We know what the people are like that work there. We know what their quality of care is like. And that's where we bring that expertise to you.
Great. All right, well, great segue. You guys are really terrific on these segues. So cost. So everything sounds great, wonderful. So let's talk about the cost of services. What should people expect to pay for your services? And is any of this covered by insurance?
So I'll start with the last question first. Our services are sometimes covered by long-term care insurance policies. So that's generally one of the first things that we'll ask in an intake call is whether or not there is a long-term care insurance policy that's able to be accessed. And we can take a look at that and help with the claims process if so. The care managers in the Charlotte market, and that's the caveat because it is different regionally, but in the Charlotte market, charge by the hour. So you're paying for our time that we're assisting you. And I would say the local range is $120 to $150 an hour. Everyone, all of the providers we're familiar with fall into that range. So that might be part of someone's, questions with a care manager. Again, as Cindy said earlier, the frequency of our visits varies based on what it is a person needs. We're very willing to have one-time conversations with people. I feel like there's a lot of value in having a conversation to reassure someone that they're on the right track or kind of brainstorm about some ideas. And if that's what they feel like they can invest in the process, I'm happy to do that, and I think Cindy is too. So that's
Yeah, and one thing I will also say is that a lot of folks, including myself, would be and are uncomfortable going into an agreement with someone where you're getting billed by the hour and not necessarily knowing, well, what range are we talking about? So a lot of times what I will do is based on what their needs are, I will say, we're looking at a range anywhere between X and Y. The other thing that I've done for clients as well is put in at their request a not to exceed amount, meaning that they may say, well, let's put $750 on the table and let's see how far we get with something. And we've done that too. And then what that means then is we just keep that particular client up to date, usually on a week-to-week basis about where we are with that funding and how much remaining fund we have left to achieve. And they may say, okay, I'm good with it, keep going. Or they may say, okay, let's hold right now. These are the most important things. Could you focus on this more than this? So we work at, the exclusive direction of the client, and we're willing to accommodate all different kinds of situations.
I think part of what can be challenging is that I think when people look at our hourly rate and they're unsure of what our involvement might look like. I think it's sometimes because when caregivers contact us, they have hit a wall and they feel like they've got a million decisions to make and they should have made them yesterday. And part of what a care manager is going to do first is help you prioritize. And so we're not going to spend a million hours helping you make those millions of decisions because they don't have to be done today. And so what we're going to do is help prioritize and spread things out and make sure you're doing things and making decisions and considering different choices at the right time so that things flow smoothly. And in doing so, we typically are able to kind of manage the cost so that it's not something that's just an inordinate amount of money in the beginning, even though it might feel like to the family that it will be just because they're very overwhelmed with the volume of decisions that they have in front of them.
Exactly.
Yeah, and oftentimes the fact that it's an unexpected cost, one that people typically aren't planning for, it always seems bigger than it is. Then the old adage, you get what you pay for. So there probably are services and added value services that can help people save money. You think about how overwhelming and confusing long-term care policies are, and most people don't even know when it's optimal to start benefits if they qualify. So maybe talk a little bit about some of those experiences, both of you, with areas where you were able to help save money or through good decisions have saved money. But also just some of the, the sort of tactical, things that you do provide that often do help people either leverage dollars that they didn't realize they had access to or other services.
Sure. So in terms of helping people to identify opportunities for additional funding, a lot of times people don't know that they may be eligible to receive additional funding. A great example of that is aid in attendance for people who have served in the military. The government's outlined certain years that if people have served, and it doesn't have to be active duty on the front line, just as long as you were part of the military. And based on what your monthly income is and the years that you have been in the military, if you qualify, you can receive additional benefits for, caregiving in your home. Also true with long-term care policies, we find almost in 100% of the cases, people wait way too long to open up their long-term care insurance claim. And I think one of the things that gets people somewhat inhibited in opening a claim is when you look at that front cover page after the table of contents, it says lifetime maximum benefit 4 years. People look at that and they say, oh, I only have 4 years to use my policy. Not true. What that means is that lifetime benefit of $478,000 was calculated if you use that service for the maximum amount of benefit every month, and that's how long it will last you. You don't have to necessarily submit every month to get reimbursed. So in other words, I have a gentleman at home with cognitive impairment. He goes through phases where maybe he is deconditioned and he has to have private PT and OT come in to help him. Then he gets better. So when he needs that help, we do submit those services and they're reimbursed. On the months that he's not getting the help, of course, there's nothing going against the policy. I've seen very sad situations where people have had a chronic debilitating diagnosis such as Parkinson's disease. And instead of looking at the policy at the onset when they were diagnosed, they waited. And one gentleman waited to the point where he was discharged home to hospice. He never got his claim even open. And I always tell people, this is money that you have been paying and they've been investing for you. You need to get it back. Please open your long-term care policy. It makes life so much better and easier from a financial perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest example of automatic value almost, is that if we're able to visit and identify that they could actually start using the policy now. I mean, sometimes that's an immediate $5,000 to $6,000 a month,
Sure.
That's going to be coming in or reimbursing them for the cost of care. So, that's going to far exceed what we're charging. So, and then I think, too, another situation is that sometimes in hospital settings, physicians will say, oh, this person needs 24-hour care. And they don't actually need to be in a situation where they're receiving 24-hour care. The doctor might have meant that they need to be supervised for 24. So they need to be in a safe place where someone has an awareness about them. Well, that's an important distinction, because if the discharge planner hears that as skilled nursing, then you're going to be paying $10,000 plus out of pocket to go into that setting. But if we're involved and we say, wait a minute, why are you saying this person needs round the clock care? Oh, they just need to have somebody that's available to them. Well, that can be accomplished in assisted living, and that's half the cost. And so that's an example of cost savings too, that I think we want to make sure that the client is getting the best care, but we also want to make sure that you're being smart about how you're spending money on care, because we know that it needs to last. We know better than a lot of people that you need to have the money for as long as possible. So we can, same thing with technology. There's a lot of technology that can help cut down on cost. And so, bringing those ideas to families to consider are other examples of the cost savings.
Good. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure we'll have a few more questions, but I thought in closing, pardon me?
We have a few questions that have come through the chat. Can you see them from there? Or shall I read them? One is, we've addressed the cost question. Someone asked, I'm caring for my husband with young onset Parkinson's disease and raising a 13-year-old. Do you have services for families?
So we evaluate our clients on a case-by-case basis. What I will say is that most of the clients that we do have are older adults. And it really depends on what the needs are at the time and what kind of capacity we have. But yes, I mean, that particular diagnosis is one that we're familiar with because a lot of our older adults have Parkinson's disease. And when we provide care services, care management services, we do provide them within the context of a team or a family. So yes, we could definitely look at that as a potential client.
Nice. And this one, I think you've kind of addressed. Do you provide caregivers as in-home care?
None of the care managers in the Charlotte area have a home care division underneath them. In other places in the country, you have those paired together, but in this market, it's separate. So if we identify that a client needed in-home care, which we often do, we would refer to care providers that we work with. And that process, that selection process can be overwhelming in and of itself. There's over 200 licensed home care agencies just in Mecklenburg County. But Cindy and I probably have 5 or 6 that we use. So helping get high quality providers, we're happy to refer that out.
Do you have a minute for additional questions if there are any?
Sure.
Okay, if there are any questions, now's the time. Type them in the chat box or turn your microphone on.
Oh, sure.
If we should go over the actual services, I mean, I understand the care management piece and advocating for the patient, going to the doctor with the patient, that sort of thing. But I also know you have counseling services for caregivers, for families. I think you, Jennifer, I believe you have nurses on staff or a nurse or what. So I've met Ashley.
Okay.
And so, for example, if you're going to a doctor's appointment with a patient, do you drive the patient there? Do you pick them up? Are you that hands-on? Or are you referring and getting other services in the community to help these folks?
Yeah, so we will drive our clients if they're at home and they need us to, or if they're in a care facility. Some care facilities have pretty strict days that they can provide transportation. So if an appointment falls outside of that time, then we can provide transportation. The way that I look at it is that it's almost better when we do transport, because I want to be able to walk into the care community after the appointment and make sure that the nurse understands what took place in the appointment, and that handoff of information is critical. And so that is something that we do. And you're right, we do have a counselor on our team, Ashley, and so she provides counseling for the family caregiver. And again, going back to what Janet said earlier, we are very focused on supporting the caregiver whenever possible. And I think a lot of the providers in this space feel that way. So Ashley was actually the first person that I hired long ago, about 10 years ago. And yeah, she is. And I recognize that caregivers really needed somebody that understood the dynamics of caregiving and could provide that one-on-one support, and that needed to be a separate process from what I was doing as a care manager for the person that they were taking care of.
I think one of the most important messages I've gotten today is the thing about it's so much easier and better for you and for the clients to engage this service sooner rather than later versus the crisis management phase.
Yes.
Which, and I think it's hard for people to do that.
It is.
You even alluded to the long-term care. We've had a long-term care policy since I can remember, paying in. And, we hesitate to activate it. It's, well, maybe we don't need it yet, or right. So, and if you do analyze long-term care policies for people, who does that? Do you have someone on your staff that's particularly skilled in insurance issues and so forth?
Yeah, any of our care managers on the team, I think most care managers can understand their way around a policy to be able to explain to you what the benefits are, how the claim process works, and even in some cases assist with, speaking to the insurance company about a claim if there's, additional information that's needed. When the long-term care insurance company sends a nurse to meet the client, we like to be there for that. The tendency of the client is always to tell the person how much they do not need help. And we really want the person to appear as though they need help so that we can help get them that approved claims. So we like to try to be a part of those appointments.
Yeah, that's my husband's standard answer. I'm fine.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting because to your point, I think there's the one aspect of knowing how to, analyze the long-term care policy. The other is the psychology of using money. And if you think about it, you're self-funding your care now. Okay. So if you think about it, use the insurance money now, and then you'll have that money that you're self-funding at today's cost with at the end of the road. And this way, you're preserving your overall capital. So there's, the psychology of that. But it is so amazing. And I tell you, the insurance companies have done a really good job of scaring the public about tapping into these funds.
Well, I always tell clients, the insurance companies only have two jobs. Anyone want to guess what they are?
Deny.
Deny your claims and take your premiums. But our company is the same way. We do lots and lots of work around long-term care insurance. I also offer services around opening claims for people. The process of gathering information for your insurance company can be very burdensome. And I try to make it as convenient for people as possible. I usually have their past medical history available to me. I can fill out most of the form for the physician. I can send it to them and make it easy and say, doctor, if you'll just, sign this form below, we'll get this sent over. And then I also do the reconciliation piece for the explanation of benefits. So if anything's denied, I'm usually the one on the phone, or Elizabeth is asking, why was this denied? We've had situations with some insurance companies that have been so poor in terms of responsiveness to the clients that we've had to write to the North Carolina Bureau of Insurance and have them reported where they did an investigation. We've also done appeals because some insurance policy lingo is so old that the current information about who can actually write an order for physical therapy, for example, is outdated, and they were denying claims based on it. So I did the research and we wrote the appeal, and then all of a sudden they were able to get their physical therapy reimbursed. Other services, we both have registered nurses. My business partner is a registered nurse, and then we also have a therapist that works with us in a non-therapy role. What she does is social engagement visits with a lot of our cognitively impaired customers. One of the other services that we offer is my business partner is a death doula. I don't know how many people have heard about a death doula. If you have ever heard about a birth doula, a birth doula is someone who meets the woman, engages in a relationship with the woman who's expecting, and maintains that relationship as a coach and a mentor, if you will, through the birthing process. Elizabeth does that very same thing. What she likes to focus on is working with people around not just advanced care planning, but how and where they want to die. A lot of times people just automatically assume that you have to die or you will die in a hospital. Not true. You can die at home. You can die in different ways with different types of people and services around you. And you can, you can be preserved in your own home if you don't want to go the route of a funeral home or something like that. So that's a term that's probably way out of the ballpark for Charlotte. We do have some death doulas in town. I don't know how many of them are actively engaged in practicing. Our goal at some point would be to meet enough death doulas in the city of Charlotte that we could create a vigil service to fill in where hospice does not provide services, so that families have the support they need when somebody is facing the transition of their life.
One item at long-term care I've found out through experience, you have a waiting period that you have to go through too. So you don't expect to get the funds right away. On top of that, if you have a waiver of premiums, once you invoke the policy, then you can stop paying those premiums. So that's another, amount of money. And I definitely agree with you. It takes a lot of time and effort to go through that whole process with the insurance company.
Yeah, the waiting period is called an elimination period. And sometimes when you buy your policy, or maybe when your policy changes its rate, they may offer what's called a rider on a policy. One of the riders sometimes they offer is the elimination of the elimination period. And if you can afford it, I would be a proponent of that, just because when you need the money, you need the money. And it's helpful to have it when you need it. Yeah, and a lot of the long-term care policies differ slightly. Most of them should not be charging you your premium while you are receiving reimbursement. That's a fundamental disconnect with what they're supposed to be doing.
I know that the 1 week policy we have, once you've been through the elimination period, and say you don't collect benefits for a while, you're not. If you never have to pay anything, you never have to go through it.
Exactly. It's a one and done. Absolutely. And one thing I will say about that too, for intermittent users of a policy, you need to also look at what the amount of time is that elapses between your last submission for reimbursement to when you might need it again. Because some companies may say, you haven't been sending us invoices for 6 months, we're going to close your claim. And you really don't want that to happen if you can prevent it, because then you have to go through the whole process again.
Well, I've also found out some policies have a monthly benefit that you can file for instead of submitting all the individual invoices. I did that for several months and then found out, oh, they'll give you $1,000 a month or whatever it is, if you meet this criteria, and still have to go through their checks and balances that they can invoke on you, like a yearly check with all your providers, or 6 months or whatever they set up, which can extra time it takes.
Yeah.
Yes, good point.
Can you be a healthcare power of attorney for someone without family or friends able to do it? A spouse who is a caregiver for someone with cognitive impairment who might need someone for themselves?
We can, we serve as people's guardian, and because we went through the process of kind of being able to do that from a liability perspective, we are able to serve as healthcare power of attorney for individuals.
And Jennifer does have that distinction that her company does offer guardian services. So it would make sense, if you are a guardian, that you are the healthcare power of attorney. The state of North Carolina has an exclusion on the books that states a healthcare power of attorney that is receiving funding or payment from the person they are representing cannot serve as a healthcare power of attorney. So what we offer is we can't serve as your healthcare power of attorney, but what we can do is help that person who you have appointed and has assumed that role to understand what's happening, serve as an advocate to them at the point where maybe you're no longer able to speak on your own behalf.
Thank you very much, everyone. What's your email for an announcement about next month's Take Charge Live?